Welcome back to Forum Daily News. I'm Wyatt Sharpe, and this is your U.S. election tracker update. Well, on Tuesday night in New York, CBS News hosted the first and likely only vice presidential debate of this cycle between Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Joining us now to discuss it all, political strategist and commentator Brittany Martinez. Brittany, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Perhaps let's just start out with the fact that this was what many people are deeming a pretty strong performance for J.D. Vance. Some people even saying that he is essentially being a vehicle for Trumpism better than someone like Donald Trump himself actually is. Is there any truth to that?
I wasn't expecting Vance to have the strongest performance, only because, and to be honest, Walz either. I thought that the debate was going to be much different than it ended up being. I thought it was going to be a little bit of dumpster fire. They're two individuals who are very passionate, and I thought they were going to come at each other. And of course, there was some of that. It's a debate. I think they actually both had pretty strong performances, and I was very surprised by JD Vance. This election cycle hasn't been the strongest for him. He's on the campaign trail supporting Trump, obviously, as his running mate, but there have been a million gaffes. That's a little excessive. There have been a good amount of gaffes, but also there were moments like when he said the abortion stuff a couple of weeks ago and how Trump would or would not support certain bans. And then when Trump was on the debate stage with Harris, he said, no, we haven't even talked about that. So though I was expecting moments like that, I think he came out strong. And I think he was able to deliver a message in a more digestible format than the former president.
And I guess perhaps too, if we're looking at Tim Walz, he obviously had a couple of gaffes. The Trump campaign is clipping some of those moments where he misspoke and what have you, which I mean is a little bit disingenuous, obviously, kind of playing into that messaging that the Trump campaign is. I mean, in fairness, I'm sure the Harris campaign would do something similar if JD Vance was the one who screwed up, putting it frankly. But I guess just is this likely to move the needle at all? I mean, we are now in October. It's the vice presidential debate. I saw a graphic that was basically highlighting the fact that undecided voters are likely not the type of people who are going to be tuning into the vice presidential debate.
I saw a similar graph or a Venn diagram. We know that Harris
Yes.
loves a Venn diagram. And it wasn't a Venn diagram at all, actually, which is kind of the joke here. But every inch counts at this point in the election. It's always going to have been a tight race, especially in those swing states. So I'm not saying that vice presidential debates don't normally count or matter, but I think this one does, right? People were tuning in, not as much as a presidential debate, but we got to hear more substantive policy than when we heard the presidential debate a couple of weeks ago. And I think at the end of the day, though, there are issues that I have with some of the candidates when it comes to their personality. It's policy that really moves the needle, I think. And I think that the vice presidential candidates were able to talk about some of those policy issues in a more robust manner than their counterparts.
And let me ask you about that because it is interesting the fact that a lot of people are saying this was a much more informative, as you had said, substantive debate than something like the presidential debate, even between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. But I guess at the same time, it's perhaps reflective of what Kamala Harris and Donald Trump would do if they were to get elected. But I guess, excuse me, what do you make of just kind of the back and forth? I mean, because you had mentioned, for example, J.D. Vance has previously misspoke in terms of representing what the official campaign position is on things like abortion. Is that mixed messaging to any degree, and how is that likely to impact the campaign?
I would call it mixed messaging. I'd probably call it a bunch of other things as well. But when you have candidates that aren't full or a team, a ticket that isn't totally on the same page, I don't think that's helpful. I think that JD Vance, for example, or Walz should feel empowered to be talking about some of these issues. And when your top of the ticket kind of comes out against you publicly in such a manner, that's not only embarrassing, right? A level of that, but it shows that people aren't on the same page, and that's a concern, and it kind of questions, your confidence in that ticket. Yes, I think that having them out there on that stage was a good opportunity. It's likely to be the last debate of this cycle because we're probably not going to have another presidential debate, even though I think the American people deserve it and would like to see one. But this was a moment that I think both vice presidential candidates needed to come forward and do no harm. I think that they were able to do that. Despite the gaffes, despite maybe not being the strongest debaters, Walls that's what his team was saying. I think he did fine. I think that they both did a good job and went out there and did exactly what they needed to do.